In the third session of the Ohio State University Nisonger Center Echo on empowering DSPs, we will hear from Nikki Watts, a behavior support specialist at Nisonger's Clinical Support Services, who will be sharing strategies on utilizing a trauma-informed approach while serving individuals with dual diagnoses. Today's learning objectives are to be able to define and describe the process of trauma-informed care or support and its importance in mental health care and treatment, to describe behavioral signs and symptoms of trauma in adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, to describe how biological, social, and environmental factors can impact trauma, and to describe how to support an individual in a trauma-informed way that avoids triggers. At this time, I invite Nikki to the stage. Welcome, Nikki, and thank you for your presentation today.
Hi, everyone. Hold on while I get this set.
Hello.
Okay, so today we're just talking about trauma-informed care and how to use some of the principles of trauma-informed care to support the individuals that we serve. When we think about trauma, we think about events or series of events that have an impact or cause an emotional response in people that can be experienced as harmful or threatening, and it may have lasting effects on a person. So when we think about trauma, we can think about multiple different types of traumas, things that maybe happen one time, such as, an incident of violence or an accident of some sort. There's also more chronic types of trauma, maybe ongoing domestic violence or abuse, or even smaller things like bullying that might only happen if it happens one time. It might not be perceived as being that harmful, but if it's ongoing and repeated, it might then lead to more lasting effects on a person. We also see more complex trauma, which is what we typically think of when we think of children that experience abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, maybe at the hands of a caregiver or loved one. What's really important, though, when we think about all of these possible traumatic events is that they're personal and they're perceived and experienced differently by every person. So myself and someone else might experience the same, natural disaster. And for me, it might be very traumatic and leave a very lasting effect on myself. But for someone else, it might not have that same effect. We do know that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities do experience trauma at a much higher rate than individuals without disabilities. Also, people with disabilities tend to have some vulnerabilities and additional stressors in their life that can really impact them. It might be challenging to be able to predict if a situation is risky or threatening. Oftentimes, people are dependent on others for their care and all those basic needs, and they might have relationships with the people that are mistreating them or abusing them. There's other additional stressors that I feel in our system as a whole people experience that could over time lead to those same, effects that we see, such as frequently moving, those changes in caregivers over and over, maybe having a sense of isolation or not having a strong social group or group of peers, and financial insecurity, things like that. When we look at possible signs of trauma, we can look at signs of some of those acute traumas or one-time traumas, such as if you see somebody that has changes in their sleep patterns, or maybe they seem more anxious than normal, or have lost interest in those things that they typically would want to participate in. Maybe they're easily startled or jumpy. That might be a sign that they've experienced something that could be traumatic in their lives. When we think of people that have experienced those more complex and ongoing chronic traumas, we often see people that have difficulty building attachments or maybe engage in more risky behaviors, possibly have difficulty identifying and expressing their emotions, as well as problem solving and lack of impulse control. Those could all be symptoms of that more complex or chronic trauma. I'm not going to go into super detail about this, but we do know that trauma does have effect on the brain and the way that we as people handle stress and respond to stressful events. We know that if someone has experienced trauma, they can be more easily triggered. We hear about that stress response that we all have, the fight, the flight, freeze, or fawn response when we're faced with stressful events. And sometimes for a person that's experienced trauma, that response might be more easily triggered. And so they might become more anxious about little things or less tolerant of stressful situations. People might have difficulty processing emotions or, more physical problems such as sleep issues or chronic illness. That's just important to keep in mind when you're working with individuals. So when we talk about trauma-informed care, there's 5 main principles of trauma-informed care, and we're trying to really shift that focus from thinking about what's wrong with a person to what's happened to them and how can we support them, and thinking that because trauma is so widespread, especially in the field that we work in, we can use this approach to everyone. We don't have to know their trauma histories or what they've been through, but we can use these skills when we're working with everybody. I'm not going to focus on all of these principles, but we'll just pick out a couple to talk about today. But we have peer support, collaboration, empowerment, voice and choice, safety, trust, and transparency. So when we talk about safety, what's really important here is not just is somebody safe, but how do they feel? Do they feel safe? And we talk about, do they feel safe in their environment? Are they physically safe? But also, are they socially and emotionally safe? Do they feel safe being the person that they want to be? Are they safe in their relationships and how they interact with others? I think about this when talking to DSPs a lot and how we talk to people and the tone of voice that we use and the things that we say. Would those lead to somebody feeling safe in their environment? We also want to really encourage empowerment and voice and choice. So really giving a person the ability to voice what they want and what they need, giving them choices in an understandable way so that they have some say and some control over what's happening in our life. We can do this by avoiding power struggles with people. We want to, not argue with them or encourage people to argue. Make sure that we're meeting people's communication needs so that they are able to communicate with us and let us know what it is they want and they need. As well as respecting people's choice, right? So if they make a choice or a decision, we want to try not to push our own opinions or thoughts about those choices onto them. A lot of trauma-informed care focuses on building trust and building trust through connection with others. So we really want to focus on building relationships with the people that we work with, talking to them when you're working with them, doing activities and tasks together, just showing interest and being there, doing things alongside of them, trying to get to know them. What are their preferences? What are their interests? We always talk about being predictable and following through. So if you say you're going to do something, then you should do it. If you're going to be at a place at a certain time, make sure you're following through. That's how we build trust in other people. Also, it helps to instill that sense of safety, right? If we know the people around us are going to follow through and do what they need to do to take care of us, we will feel more safe. Validating people's feelings and offering them support. Instead of minimizing how they feel or dismissing it or saying, oh, that's just a bad day, move on. We want to say things like, I see you're upset. I know this is hard. How can I help you? Also working on improving and modeling social skills so that people have the ability and the skills to build relationships with others. We're always encouraging people to join groups and social activities or clubs. There's so many things out there. Um, a lot of the people that we work with do need help with that, though. So that's something that we can do. Some common triggers that we can avoid, um, avoiding saying words such as no and don't and stop. Instead, let's talk about, yes, we can do that. Here's when we can do it. Again, we talked about tone of voice and how you talk to somebody. A big thing we talk about a lot is predicting and planning for new or possible stressful events. So, talking about, hey, what is this event going to look like? What happens if it doesn't go how you plan? And what can you do if that happens? If you start to feel stressed, if you need a break, what are things that we can do in that situation? That routine, that predictability really does help somebody again with that feeling of being safe and in control. Um, we know that routine and predictability leads to a sense of safety, so making sure we're giving advance notice of change and letting people know what's coming next can be very helpful. Lastly, when we talk about trauma-informed care, we always talk about building resiliency. So resiliency is really our ability to bounce back or adapt or handle stressful situations or adverse situations. Um, you know, research has shown that resiliency does in fact help a little bit with the healing of trauma as well as preparing us for future adverse events. To build resiliency, we focus on that voice and choice. Again, giving somebody control over their life as much as we can. Choices, talking about goals, and making plans to meet those goals. Working on improving self-esteem. We can do that by giving praise, lots of praise, specific and descriptive praise. So not just a good job, but telling somebody exactly what it is that they're doing well. Exploring somebody's dislikes and likes. We come across a lot of people that don't know what they like and what they don't like. So really talking about that, getting to know who they are and what their preferences are. Physical activity is always positive, and we can really build our self-esteem by helping other people. Wellness and general wellness is important to build resiliency, focusing on things like nutrition and sleep and getting that mental health treatment and taking medications as recommended by doctors. We also talk about mindfulness and working and practicing on other ways to reduce stress. I know there's a lot of good technology out there that I recommend to help walk through some of those wellness or mindfulness techniques. There's apps and stuff that people could put on their phones. And lastly, we really focus on connection and relationships. So doing activities with other people, working together as a group, being part of something. And then again, that validating feelings and offering support when you're interacting with someone. And that's all I have. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Nikki, for that presentation. And I like that the build up and the focus on the resiliency of, through this trauma-informed approach, building knowledge and skills to be able to not only overcome, but also react, positively to future life events as well. So these are lifelong skills that we're building. One community member in the chat had mentioned wanting to hear more about apps for mindfulness. Do you have any good examples? I see another member had mentioned Headspace being a good app. Any other recommendations?
Headspace is the one that comes to mind for me that I typically recommend. It's easy to access. Insight Timer, I feel like, is one that I've heard of.
I was going to say last week we talked about Calm and Insight Timer.
Yeah.
There you go.
Great. Anybody else have recommendations, tools, apps that you're aware of or you use regularly? And let me open it up to any other questions that you might have. Are there any questions? Or alternatively, are there any pieces of information that you heard through this presentation that you want to emphasize or echo?
I would just like to say I wish I took this class 2 years ago before I got my two daughters. Very educational on exactly how and every mood swing and behaviors that we went through due to all of the abuse.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and certainly would continue to seek your expertise and what you've learned through the process. Especially the things that you're learning through this series that you really wish you would have known before. So that will help us better understand some of those more salient, important points. But thank you for sharing that, Elizabeth. There is one question in the chat, Nikki. How can you implement these strategies with those that are nonverbal and do not use a communication device?
Sure. I would say a lot of the um, things could be, focus on how you're talking to the person and, still using that validation and that calm communication and praise. I think giving them that empowerment and voice and choice can be more challenging, but you'll have to just pick up on their nonverbal communication as far as what their preferences are, what their dislikes are. If they don't use a communication device, could they point to pictures or somehow otherwise let you know what it is that their preferences are? But I think you can assume that hopefully their receptive language skills are there, that you can continue to talk to them and use that validation and that supportive communication.
Thanks, Nikki. A couple other comments in the chat here. Someone mentions environmental supports, surrounding the person in comforting and safe spaces, using colors, textures, temperatures, and lighting. When the environment can prompt a person, it provides independence and lessons, staff prompting and demands. Someone else agrees with what you had mentioned, Nikki, that you're correct, and that's working for them as a strategy. Brenda says, in my experience, one of the most important aspects of working towards healing from trauma is creating hope. Healing can happen. You will be okay. Things that you might mention to someone, you won't always feel this way. Additional examples that you were kind of providing for that positive reinforcement, encouragement, and support. We're all here to help and support you, and also use the five senses to support, like aromatherapy, sunshine, exercise. Really good ideas as well to go beyond verbal communication and even body language into the other senses. Really like that idea. Some other strategies, and then I see Christine has her hand raised. Someone else had mentioned patience, right? Is the virtue, and that's kind of the old saying. And someone else mentions talking calmly, showing love and respect, and sometimes a gentle hug can help those as well with being nonverbal and just being that empathetic um, support person to another human being's really important for us to continue to keep in mind. Christine?
What you all should think of is about the My Mental Health Toolkit we created that has pictures and photos. Then it also has clear language words that we made that makes it so people could know about the individual even before going to a doctor's appointment or when they're about to work with that individual. How best to communicate with the individual. Do they even use things like even whiteboard, or for somebody that's nonverbal or deaf, okay? and then also some other things. So we have that on the RRTC website, and so I wanted to point that out.
Thanks, Christine. And thanks again, Nikki, for that presentation. If the community has additional recommendations of technology tools that you're using or you come across throughout these sessions, we continue to encourage you to share those out. If you have any additional questions or comments, again, feel free to continue using the chat to engage and interact with each other. At this time, we're going to transition into our case study for the session. And